It is a rainy day in Gulfport, Mississippi, which is pretty fitting, seeing that it is the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, a storm which my family did not evacuate from. We stayed right here. A lot of people don't understand why that happens. I think I hear a lot of jokes like, just move or just leave, you get enough time to know, but people don't understand the process of evacuation. Typically, if you're in a place like Mississippi, you only have a few rural roads that you can leave town out of, and imagine everybody in town on that same road at the same time. You start to get to that quandary of, is it better to die in your house or die on the road, or what chances you have. So, and it's also, hurricanes are so unpredictable about where they're going to land. I think Katrina was originally supposed to hit Panama City, and then it veered west right at the last minute, so it ended up hitting us. I remember I was doing something for our church group that Saturday, and Katrina hit by Tuesday. But Saturday, it was a very normal day. Didn't think my life was going to completely change in the next week, and by Tuesday, we were in a house in Moss Point, watching the storm surge pour through the electrical outlets and the house that was a office that my stepmom and grandma ran together, but it was an old house that they turned into an office space. So I remember growing up, I didn't have the best relationship with my family. Call it being the oldest, call it being the only child from my actual parents' marriage, or call it just being a teenager, I don't know. But I remember by that Monday, there was a panic in the house. And, I remember thinking, when you're 8 to 10 years older than your siblings, you kind of grow up as the spare parent. And I remember there was just a panic of what we're going to do. And me being the know-it-all teenager, I started yelling at my stepmom, and I think she threw a glass of water at me, and I bowed up. I didn't do anything, but my dad, I still remember the look in his eye because he came to come hit me, but nothing ever happened other than us getting out of the house and trying to do the best. We didn't evacuate, but we did leave our house because we lived in a trailer, which thank God, because that trailer got destroyed during the storm. But yeah, I remember, I'm 17 years old and we're in this house. And at first, the weird part of a hurricane, if you've never lived through one, they'll always tell you the northeast quadrant is the most dangerous part, and that's the first part. As far as the wind damage, that was the case. It sounds like a train, like 1,000 trains just all at once when you can hear it. And I remember we weren't close enough to the eye for you to feel the experience of being in the eye of a hurricane. I have been through the eye of a hurricane before, and it's weird because it's like you go through this crazy intense wind and rain and flooding and all kinds of mayhem, and then suddenly the eye hits and it's clear. And then that lasts about an hour, and then it just goes right back to chaos. So I remember it seemed like everything was going okay at first. The wind was fine, no tornadoes, because Moss Point is far enough away from what should have been, or what was the ground zero, which was Bay St. Louis and Waveland, Mississippi, not New Orleans, and I'll get to that in a minute. But I remember when the storm surge hit, which, if you've looked up the statistics, it was a 27-foot wave that came about 6 miles inland, and we were not far enough inland to avoid it. But the water started coming. I remember looking outside, seeing that there was a flood on the street, turning to look at my dad, saying something, and when I turned back around, the water was already at the door. And then it started pouring through the electrical outlets. That's the thing that I always remember the most. And very quickly, this is in a span of like 30 seconds. Very quickly, I remember, there's grandparents, there's my little siblings, I had cousins, there was a baby, my stepmom, my dad, my uncles, a bunch of people in the house, and we very frantically and in a pure panic all joined hands and started praying to God not to kill us right there. And I don't know, maybe it is God. Maybe there is some kind of miracle because it did stop. You know, at that point, I think the water was up to about my thighs. And now we're trying to figure out what to do, you know, because there was a moment where, like, if the flood does happen, I'm trying to troubleshoot things. Do we go in the attic? You know, well, if you do that, then you're stuck. You know, what do we do? Do we cut our way into the roof with an axe? You know, what are the options that we have right now? And I remember having a somber moment with my dad when we were outside, because, you know, my mom lived in Alabama. And I remember having a somber moment right before the storm surge hit, where I realized that this was going to be a big one and that my life was going to be forever changed. And I said, you know, I got to move, right? And he looked at me and said, you got to do what you got to do. And that was the day I feel like I became a man. Having that realization that you're looking at your father, who, you didn't say that to be a smartass, you just said, hey, you're a man now, you got to make your own decisions. And that's what I did later. So I think we were able to wait it out for a little bit, but now we're in this filthy water in this, like, old house, and you know, waiting around and trying to make the best of it. I remember the kids all playing in it and jumping off of we had like a table that they were jumping off of, doing cannonballs into this filthy water. But then we started noticing things like eels and snakes in the water. So then it becomes a panic of trying to get on top of tables, get on top of countertops to avoid being in the water. So I would say that just uncomfort or discomfort lasted for another 2 or 3 hours, and the storm surge kind of started to subside, at least enough for us to start walking around the street to try to figure out, you know, how we can get back to somebody's house and see who even has a house to go back to. You know, let's pick one of the family members and see where we're going. And we were able to, I think somebody might have picked us up in a boat, because people do that during hurricanes. When it floods, they'll drive by in boats. And somebody picked us up, and we were able to get to dry land. And then I can't remember how we figured out like what car to go to or whose car it was, but we were able to, I think it was my truck actually. I think my truck was the only vehicle that survived in my family. But we were able to get to my grandmother's house, and that's where the rest of it happened. You know, you think the storm's over, but then you got to deal with, well, now we don't have power. Now there's no AC, and it's the middle of or the end of August. Now what? There's no running bath water. There's no refrigeration for food. So we just went to sleep. I guess we're just tired, but now you're in a muggy house that's wet everywhere, trying to sleep. Like, it's really hard to sleep when it's like 90 degrees outside and 100% humidity, you know, and water all over the carpets. So whatever. I was still in the Mississippi Gulf Coast area for about a week after that. I eventually did go up to my mother's house in Birmingham, Alabama, and that's where I stayed. I actually finished out my senior year in Calera, Alabama. But for that week, I remember that was when the real problem started, because we didn't have running water, or no water at all, and it was hard to figure out a place to get, you know, because I know the National Guard was like passing out like pallets of water, and it was hard. One thing that happens in big disasters like that is on the radio, which was the only form of communication that we had, like mass communication. There's no TV, but radio, if you could find a radio or a generator to even power it or put batteries in it. You know, we were hearing all these rumor mills about things that were destroyed that actually weren't, things that weren't destroyed that actually were, false information about where National Guard units were going to be giving out food and water. I mean, just, it was a chaos of just misinformation, just from, I don't know if it's panic or if it's people that troll on the radio, but, you know, it was a thing that was happening. I remember hearing that my school had gotten destroyed, and then later I found out that my school hadn't gotten destroyed, it was just the gym got destroyed. So just the rumor mill happens, and but before we figured that out, you know, figured out what the real reality was, I think about 3 days went by. We didn't have food and water when we were just having to live off of what little water was already in the fridge and rationing it. That's a scary thing. And then my grandparents, they have diabetes, and so we're worried about where they're going to get their next insulin. So that was, I can't really tell you what's more terrifying, the rush of praying to God to not kill your family, or not knowing where you're going to get your next meal or water. And then watching your young siblings who were babies, and having to tell them we don't have any food. So that situation helped when my mother came. And the reason it took so long for her to come down was because apparently her and a bunch of my other family came down with a bunch of supplies, but they were blocked off by, the roads were all closed from just trees falling down and falling over and bridges being completely out, torn away. And when they finally got there, they actually brought a bunch of supplies, a bunch of food. And I remember my grandmother, my mom and I'm from divorced parents, so this is my mother coming to my step-grandmother's house, and my grandmother thanking her. I remember the tears that came out of my grandmother's eyes. When she brought sweet tea, I remember was what it was. She brought some sweet tea and some food, and I can't remember how the medicine thing ended up working out, but off I was to Calera, Alabama after that. And it was a weird situation going to a different school, because I had just gone through this whole traumatic experience, and going to this other school where people are still in high school, just living a regular high school life, and don't know anything about this. They know about it from the news, but the reality is the news only reported about it from New Orleans. The news literally, when they talked about the carnage, brought up Mississippi as the landmass between Alabama and Louisiana.
So between Mobile in Alabama and New Orleans in Louisiana is what the Weather Channel has inexplicably named a landmass. Hello, Weather Channel. That's called Mississippi. It's what Hurricane Katrina hit and destroyed.
They couldn't even remember the name of our state. And that's a thing that anybody that's watching this that's from here, you know the anger and betrayal that you feel about being overlooked by the National News Service, and I don't blame the people of New Orleans at all. I blame the press, I blame the media, because the media is the one that made it racially charged. It wasn't the people of New Orleans. The media was the one that was taking pictures of people stealing TVs and going, this isn't really looting, and it ends up not even being a looting picture from Katrina. It was just like people being racially charged and trying to race bait. That had nothing to do with the people in New Orleans. That was just the media. So, it was understanding, because people in this new school thought that I was from New Orleans, and I was like, no, I'm from Latimer, Mississippi. What do you mean New Orleans? Katrina hit us. So it was a weird experience going to this school, because it took about 2 weeks for me to do the paperwork. And also, I had to, because of being in that water and not having a bath for a week, and not having AC or anything like that, nothing. I had staph infection on my legs that I had to go to the doctor to the hospital to get that covered up. Or not covered up, but medicated. Because it's just that water's filthy, it's all kinds of bacteria and viruses and stuff that gets in there. And but I remember when I was finally starting to get excited, because I was like, all right, life's gonna kind of go back to normal. I'll be able to live like a regular high school life. And I remember I had lost everything. I lost everything, and the burden on my mother now, because it wasn't just me that she took in some of my cousins with my stepdad. So now the financial burden on the household was vast. We're in a 3-bedroom household, living with sister, my 2 grandparents, my cousin, and my mom and stepdad. So that's 2 to a room, and I'm basically on the couch at first. And I remember the week, it was because this is a smaller town. This is in Calera, Alabama, which is about 30 miles south of Birmingham. And I remember the week before, people knew that like a Katrina refugee was coming to like be at their school. So a bunch of people banded together and passed out a bunch of basically we would wake up to like trash bags of clothes that I needed. I didn't have any. I had like 2 shirts and 1 pair of pants. And my mom couldn't afford to buy much more than that, so I actually needed these clothes. But I remember, you're going to a new school and it's your senior year and you're thinking, it's a fresh start. I'm trying to get my mind back into the, who's the popular kid, whatever. So imagine that experience. And now you're going to this new school on the first day wearing everybody else at that school's hand-me-downs. It was quite an experience. They ended up voting me best dressed, which I felt was a little pretentious on their part, but hey, Kalira took me in, so I'll always thank them for that. But I would still go back, because you still trauma bond with the people that you're from, or the place that you're from. And I remember on the weekends I would drive back down when things started kind of cooling off. I would drive back down to Biloxi, Ocean Springs to see my friends, and they were starting to start school again. And I just remember every time I was down there, just watching the rebuilding process. And again, with New Orleans, I think the media is at fault for this, but what I saw wasn't the same horrible experience in terms of the rebuilding. I mean, it was hard work, but at one point I volunteered. I went to a church and with some of my family and cleaned out like all the wet carpet that was in the church so that people could stay there. And that was some of the hardest labor that I have ever done in my life. Like, my God, carpet that gets wet is heavy. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but man. But I just remember it being such a beautiful moment. I feel like I hear stories about this after 9/11 in New York, where people just kind of came together and it no longer became about political parties or who's popular or who. It just became about let's help each other. It became like the currency became kindness, and that's just something that you don't see that often. And it's sad that it takes such adversity to pull that out of humankind. But it's the one thing that I always look back to whenever I get depressed. And believe me, I go to therapy, but I do suffer through suicidal thoughts sometimes. And some of that's from the war and some of that's through this. But what always pulls me out of that mindset is remembering that there is something worth fighting for, because this community came together and fought for each other. And I just can't forget that. And I'm so blessed now. I moved away because after my senior year, I joined the Marine Corps because I didn't have anywhere to go. And then I did my 5 years. I had a longer contract because I was intel. But I got out and, for a while I did the thing where I was like, I'm not going to move back to my small town. I'm better than that now. And I lived in Phoenix. I lived in, I would commute to LA. So like in the later times of living in Phoenix, I would commute to LA for comedy gigs. I started doing stand-up comedy. And that's now my full-time gig. And I remember I moved back because my father was dying and he's passed away now. But I moved back to take care of those affairs. I don't want to get too much into that, but I remember thinking, I just want to stay here for that, and then I'll move back or move somewhere else. I think LA was on my mind at the time. And then, of course, COVID happens. And, COVID gave me a lot of time to think about what my next move was going to be. And I looked at it and realized, I could build a comedy scene here that's devoid of all the problems that I was seeing in other cities. Devoid of all the pay-to-play scams and all the people that do bringer shows and all just the sexual misconduct that I was always seeing from comedy bookers in the past. I hated seeing that. Like so many comedy scenes and just cliques of comedy scenes would fall apart, rise and fall because of just people couldn't keep their dicks in their pants, and I wanted to start something where we don't have to be that way. And I'm proud of what we have here. I still want to be a comic more than I do want to be a producer. I just know that I want to lead this until other people start taking over. I've had a couple of conversations with two comics that I look up to this year, that I've booked in the past. And, they told me, like, if you're taking comedy seriously, you got to get out of here and go to Austin or go to New York. And this, what I'm talking about today is why I won't do that, because, or at least not anytime soon, at least not until this comedy scene stands up on its own as a locally led scene. Because I know the comics here all have similar stories to this. The reason I know is because every once in a while, Katrina gets brought up on the comedy patio, and it's a somber moment, but all of us have different experiences and stories from the storm that ultimately always end up coming back to, hey, remember that, when the bowling alley opened up and had free beer nights or whatever, stories like that, where everybody was just coming together and trying to make the best out of a bad situation. And I think that because of that, like, comedians that are coming out of here are going to end up showing the world that we have a very special voice that you're not going to see everywhere else. And that's what I want to hone in on. And I want to make sure that is out there. And it is, for the people that would consider themselves my rival or my enemy, I don't really consider you that. And you know who you are. The thing that I get emotional about the most isn't about whether I get booked or not. I get booked enough. I don't have to worry about it. And I've learned over the years that there's some people that are going to like you, some people that don't. But one thing that I do get upset about, and I do get emotional about, is when producers from out of the state come over here and they start, like, booking things that have nothing to do with any of the local comics, and just steamrolling all over us. And I think, and I hope that if you are listening to this, and I know that you watch my content, I hope that you understand now that this is why. It's because all of us, because it's not just me, it's the other local comics that see this stuff. And there's not just one producer, by the way. There's multiple. The reason that we get so upset and emotional is because we still remember when we got overlooked by the entire national media. So to us, it's not fair. And it's not like I don't book people from out of town. I make sure that everybody gets represented, but I always make sure that locals have the first dibs, on opening spots, on featured spots. And that's why, because I want to hone this craft specifically to what this community has to offer in the unique voice that the comedians that have grown here, that I've watched grown here, that I have helped, I want them to be able to put their voice out there into the world. So hopefully this is one of those things that it's my own, like, heart to heart with anybody that would listen, because this is the anniversary of Katrina and we all have our own stories about it. If you're from the region, not just from Mississippi, but all of us, from Mobile all the way to the North Shore. I know that was a big, they got affected as well. But I'm going to continue to fight for this community and fight for the comedy scene that we have built together, because I think that we can still get back to that without having to go through adversity. We can get back to the love and kindness that we shared for each other in this community when things were bad. So, thank you for listening.